Hello, and welcome to the video presentation for Secretly Philosophy, Designing Interdisciplinary First-Year Courses. My name is Bailey Sussack, and I am a sixth-year PhD student at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge and recognize and honor the fact that the UIC campus exists on spaces that are occupied and were originally home to various indigenous tribes, as well as social settlements and immigrant spaces in Chicago. So a question that I think a lot of us, if not all of us as philosophy instructors face, is a question of how do we get new students interested in philosophy? Not just to increase our enrollment numbers, but also to think about diversity and inclusivity. How are we expanding who is involved in philosophy and who participates in it? And one answer, not the only answer, but one answer that I have is by getting them interested in another topic and then sneaking the philosophy in. So we're going to be using what I'm calling FYIs, because everyone loves a good acronym, which are first-year interdisciplinary courses. So in this video, I'm hoping to motivate using these FYI courses, providing a framework for developing them. I'm going to give an example of a course, an FYI course that I've taught in the past, and then I'm going to provide you tools to begin creating your own FYIs. So to start off by motivating these courses, the core concept is that these are entry-level, ground-level entry points. So thinking about freshmen, thinking about new-to-college students, accessible to anyone from any background to engage in philosophical investigation and build foundational academic and philosophical skills. And so these courses, though I won't be able to get into it too much in this video, they're a vehicle for inclusive pedagogy and for diversifying philosophy. So why teach these as FYIs? So the benefit of teaching intro-level courses as these interdisciplinary courses is that it's building core academic skills that our students will need both in our philosophy classes and in college in general. It's going to build foundational philosophical skills that they're going to use going forward as they get more advanced in philosophy. And it's gaining student buy-in through interesting and relevant course topics. So here's the framework, and if you ignore the text underneath for a minute and just look at these three pieces. There's the philosophical toolkit. So what is philosophy bringing to the table? What tools are we going to be using, giving the students that come from philosophy? There's the academic skills. So what are the skills that they need in order to succeed as a college student? This is reading, writing, research, these kinds of things. And then the last piece is the topic content. So this is where if our course is about dinosaurs, or if it's about pop culture, or if it's about art, whatever it is, finding the materials about that topic, and looking specifically at this column here, looking at stuff that is not just philosophy articles about, philosophy of whatever, right? We're looking at news articles, we're looking at YouTube videos, social media, guest lectures, pop culture, these kinds of things. And so the framework here is we're taking pieces from each of these three categories and adding them together to create this FYI course. And I'll go into this further in a moment here. So this framework relies on treating philosophy as a toolkit and not a content. So what we're teaching the students to do, and we're modeling it with them by doing it with them, is investigating questions and discovering ideas and answers to those questions by using philosophy. So they're philosophizing, not learning the philosophy of, or reading some canonical text. The academic skills that we're adding in, such as reading comprehension, conducting research, composition, are the tools students need to develop, understand, develop, and communicate ideas. And then the topic content is where we really get the interdisciplinary action. So what kinds of materials, resources, and activities can you bring to the table to both engage students and to create accessibility? So again, underlying this, though I won't go into detail, is the idea of universal design for learning. So diversifying and making accessible all of our materials, all of our teaching, to get as many students included as possible. So inclusive pedagogy generally as well. And so these materials can provide information, they give us room to raise questions and present new perspectives, and we're going to apply the philosophy tools and apply the academic skills to use them. So to start off with, we want to find a spark. So starting with an idea, a topic, or an inspiration that excites you and can make it the class and that you can make relevant and interesting to your students in order to hook them in. Once you have that topic, once you have that spark, then you can teach your students how to use their toolkits, and in doing so, you're teaching them philosophy. So what works as a spark? Your course topic should be accessible, relevant, and intriguing. And so this is going to be looking at things the students are going to be interested in learning about, things that they interact with or think about already in their everyday lives, or you could go completely off the wall and do something that they've probably never thought of before. And you can find inspiration anywhere. So drawing from your own research interests, looking at politics and society, looking at pop culture. Anything that sparks your interest, chances are there's going to be students who are interested in it, or you can make it interesting for them. Some examples that I can tell you about, just off the top of my head real quick. An audiobook about dinosaurs that I listened to recently. A novel by Andy Weir, Project Hail Mary, that has lots of interesting questions about personhood and ethics. Anything that's happening in the news with, racial violence and social injustice. All of these things can become fuel for an FYI course. So now let's look at an FYI in action. This is where I'm going to give you an example from the first FYI course I taught, which was actually designed for an English department. I taught their first year composition courses for a couple years, required for all undergraduates. So I got every kind of student imaginable that were starting their academic careers at UIC. And I chose the topic of public art because it was something that interested me, but also being in Chicago meant that it's something that the students interacted with on a daily basis, but we also had a lot of access to. Now, you might not be in a location like Chicago to be able to go out and access public art museums and all the cultural advantages that we have, but the World Wide Web has amazing resources and all kinds of websites that you can use in order to facilitate some of these topics, even if you don't have the sort of community access to. And so here on the right, you see this is my visual syllabus, the sort of one-pager of the syllabus, and I'll include this in the resources as well. And so filling out this framework for this course, so looking at the philosophical toolkit, we were using things like definitions and arguments, looking at ethical issues, looking at aesthetics, academic skills of reading scholarly texts, which is something that students have to learn how to do, being able to support claims, being able to write and build and communicate arguments. And then the topic content, this is again where the sort of interdisciplinary comes in. You might think it's from the English and the philosophy coming together, which it is, but also building in, this is materials from urban planning, from economics, from art history, looking at public art, getting guest lectures in, looking at kinds of materials like drunk history videos and news articles, making public art ourselves, and I'll go into this again in a second here. But really having such a wide variety of sources and entry points into the topic that students from any major, any background, were able to find something to latch onto that got them excited about it. And then giving them, say, here's some philosophical stuff that you can do, here are some tools that you can use in order to do philosophy about it. So here are some highlights, which I'll go into following here. So one of the things that I thought was really important, really helpful, that really engaged students was guest lectures. So there was a queer Latinx Chicago muralist named Sam Kirk. This is her work on the right here. Talked about her work and how her identity impacted her work as a public artist. One of my colleagues, Emily Lacey, came in and gave a sort of master lecture on the history of the bean, officially known as Cloudgate, which is an iconic Chicago sculpture, but actually, as she taught us, is only fairly recent, and so really gave us an interesting perspective on how this piece of public art has changed the landscape of Chicago and thinking about how people interact with it. And then we also had a faculty member from the Institute for Research on Race and Political Policy, is that right? I think that's right. Sorry, the acronyms jerked me up here. Who is involved in the Chicago Torture Justice Memorial Project. And so this is using public art and using interventions to... I'm so sorry, my thoughts just stopped. Seeking reparations for victims of police torture, trying to get laws changed, and trying to get a memorial erected so that this is not something that is forgotten by Chicago or swept under the rug. So using public art as an intervention in social justice. So the major activity that changed the course of this class, and really the ways that I thought about teaching, was this project called Tilted Arc. So you should stop and Google for this for a second. But it is a public artwork by Richard Serra. And it was this massive wall that cut off, or that intersected a Federal Plaza, and it really ticked off a lot of people and eventually got removed. And so the students were given this pile of cardboard, a couple rolls of tape, and said, make something in the spirit of Tilted Arc. You have 30 minutes. You have whatever space in this building or outside of it you want, but work together to create this installation, and then we're going to talk about it. And what happened after that 30 minutes is, one, you can see the students were quite productive. One of them, one section of this class actually built a wall. This is in the middle of the hallway, so blocking access. Everyone coming in had to move around that wall. And then this other section built inside the classroom. But we had these really amazing conversations thinking about the role of the artists, thinking about how it affects the space, how it affects the audience. And so these conversations really sparked some really deep philosophical questioning and made connections back to the materials that we were reading in the class that really changed how my students engaged in and cared about the course. And so what I ended up doing is working with the campus to get some funding, to get some space, to actually allow the students to design, create, and install their own site-specific art installations, public art, in our writing center. And through the process of actually designing and creating these works, we were again engaging with the materials and thinking about public art, thinking about the ethics of it, thinking about how did this count as public art, what was it trying to do, what was the purpose, what was the goal. And these things were super influential in deepening our conversations, again, about the philosophy of public art, but also the research that the students were doing. And to give you an example of some of the research projects that they actually came up with when they were writing their own final papers, they had free reign to do anything they wanted as long as it related to public art. They came up with, by and large, entirely philosophical ideas. So looking at placemaking, looking at ownership, censorship, gentrification, a lot of ethical issues, a lot of aesthetics issues, a lot of definitions and concepts. This was not something that I pushed them towards to do philosophy, but because we had engaged in it, they were able to find these things that interested them and bring philosophy to it. And so this was an example of an FYI course. Now, as I said, this course was a partnership between English and philosophy, but it can be just a straightforward philosophy class. Like if you're teaching an intro to ethics, or if you're teaching, any kind of philosophy really, is just to bring this sort of interdisciplinary spirit of creating new resources, making it engaging, and giving them tools. And then you can get into the nitty-gritty stuff once they make it past that entry-level class. So what I am providing for you, this is in the resources that come with this video, is there's going to be a handout to guide you in brainstorming to design your own FYI course. I'm also going to provide a couple examples of thinking about actually classes that I have thought about based off of a spark that I've had, and how to sort of fill out the framework of designing this course. And then I'm also going to give you links to sample syllabi from the 2 English FYI courses I've taught, as well as a recent course that was an introduction to ethics that came out of one of those English courses. So you can get a sort of a full picture of what one of these FYI courses looks like. So I want to thank you for your time and listening. I look forward to the conversation that we'll have in the Q&A. And if you have any questions or want to have any further discussion about this, please feel free to contact me.